welcome to another episode of Textory. Today we will be time traveling to 1920s, but we're gonna be talking about something that I don't think we've ever touched on this podcast before, which is children. Now, this is the moment where some of you are gonna click away because I know children are not a very graceful topic and understandably, they can be a little annoying, but today we're going to find out what sort of approach people had to raising children and what tips they had for raising children and how that differed from the approach we have nowadays, whether it was worse, whether it was better. So we're going to have this sort of comparison, which I think is really interesting. I was always wondering if something that our ancestors, our grandparents and great-grandparents did was better, because honestly, when I look at old people, they seem to have it all sort of sorted out, unless they're the rude kind of old people. But let's face it, not all of them are. Some of them are really, really good people. And I'm always wondering if, in 1920s, teenagers would keep their legs on the bus seats or if it's a new development or if it's always been like this. Like, socially, do we even change as a society, or is it always the same? Older people complaining about younger people and then younger people turning out just fine. So it might as well be that. But I'm always thinking about some values that we lose along the way, because obviously we tend to think that we get everything so much better than people used to in the past. Obviously, we have the scientific research, psychology is much more developed, and we are able to reassess what our behavior does to children. And that's something that people in the past didn't have. But sometimes I wonder if we're not overdoing it a little bit. So we're going to find out in today's episode. Before we get into today's text, don't forget to check out my Patreon at patreon.com/textory, where we show some things that are not really related to the episodes, and sometimes they are, but mostly it's the fun stuff that is usually kind of visual, so it's difficult to show in the podcast. So go there, check it out, and maybe sign up if you feel like it. So 1920s as an era was an actually quite important moment in children's history. First off, it was just after the First World War, which is obviously gruesome for both soldiers and civilians. And people started wondering, in a conflict such as this, we need to take better care of the disabled. We need to take better care of the sick, the elderly, and the children, of course, because during the war, their condition has worsened. They were displaced, they were orphaned, they were hungry, they were unwell, and they were just in need of support and assistance. So this was actually not a new movement, because since the end of the 19th century, reformists were ringing the alarm and trying to address the conditions of the children. They were saying that, okay, children are working in factories, this is not looking good, there is a lot of trafficking, education is not doing great. So they were sort of promoting social and legal measures to make sure those children are taken care of. And then after the First World War, they were like, okay, we actually need some legal action to make sure they're going to be just fine. And the League of Nations was established in 1919, and they created the Committee for the Protection of Children in 1924. So that committee adopted the Declaration of the Rights of the Child. And it was a couple of articles. It's really basic things, such as the child must be given the means requisite for its normal development. The child that is hungry must be fed. Okay. The child must be the first to receive relief in times of distress. So it's not really groundbreaking, but just putting that into writing and asking people to follow those rules was, something new. So the book that we're reading today is called The Best Method for Raising Children by Geraldine B. Foster. I was trying to find some more information about the author, like who she was, what her link was to children, but I actually couldn't find much. So we're just going to jump into the text and see what she has to say. The inspiration, of which this book is the result, arose from the author's observation of many mothers who, having started their career under the usual happy auspices, busy with cares and responsibilities, filled with joy and expectation, find themselves in later life neglected, their early maternal hopes shattered, their children but a source of regret. This is a strong opening because I didn't realize that back in 1920s it was okay to even mention the fact that maybe not everyone is made to be a mother and maybe some people regret it, because I'm assuming the general thought was this is what you were born to do as a woman. But 1920s, we get some progressive voices in that era, and I think this is one of them here. The author's purpose in presenting this subject is to prevent mothers from following their habitual erroneous way in the raising of their children and alleviate their suffering in late years. If this work, by its suggestions, accomplishes such results, we feel it justifies its existence. The methods which women use in raising the future generation are many. One is that of taking advice from their own mothers or from old friends. They follow the directions received to a certain extent until they become handicapped by difficulties that arise to complicate their problems. That's also still a bit true. We tend to listen to people that already have kids when we try to figure out how to raise our own, but then we find that the tips and methods given are perhaps not really working for that particular child, because that's one thing. You can have a lot of guides on raising children, but each child is different, and even between siblings, what works for one might not work for another. That was a crazy voice crack, by the way. Babies. There are certain things that mothers should not do. 1. Avoid exposing the baby to cold air. Have his body well wrapped up in warm clothing. This is something that grandmas still swear by, and they want children to be super hot, whereas we nowadays know that overheating a baby is just as dangerous, if not more dangerous, than it being cold. So this is a struggle that I've heard about from a lot of people, that they have to explain to their parents or elderly that no, you do not need a hat on that baby, you do not need socks on that baby, you don't need to wrap it up in warm clothing, as this author here says. It's just fine. 2. Avoid subjecting your baby to excitement, such as playing with him to amuse yourself or the family. That's a crazy tip. Don't play with the baby, or, it will get excited. Don't make your baby happy. 3. Give your baby plenty of sleep, for sleep makes him grow, while excitement gives him a nervous and restless disposition. So basically just leave the baby, because it's better for him. 4. Do not be alarmed by a baby's cry. Find out if his cry is caused by pain or by temper. If by pain, minister to him by following the instructions given in the literature received. If his crying is caused by temper, let him cry. In that manner he exercises his lungs. Do not forget that babies soon learn that by crying they obtain the things they want. The OG cry it out method that is nowadays also sort of criticized by most. Back then it was not really a problem. And an interesting point about a baby crying on purpose. I don't know what the right solution is. I'm not a child psychologist, but children definitely learn to manipulate the parents quite early on. I'm not sure if letting him cry is a good solution, but that's just something that they point out. 5. Furthermore, do not make the mistake of encouraging him to walk too early, as by doing so, the natural growth of his legs may be impaired. Mothers often do this prompted by a petty ambition, and in many cases are rewarded by a bow-legged child. So I've checked it if it's still true, and you actually can give your child both legs if you start too early. But in general, as long as you're not forcing your child to walk and you're letting him crawl, I think the child should be just fine, like naturally developing his walking skills. When baby becomes a child, mothers and fathers should try to perfect their behavior when their baby is about 3 years old. They must be conscious that everything they say and do is heard and learned by a constant witness. They must avoid careless chatting, arguing, or quarreling among themselves, gossiping and ridiculing others. They must refrain from showing temper in any form. I mean, it's true that children observe a lot and they tend to copy you, and, whatever behaviors you allow yourself, the child would most likely at some point find them natural or attempt them. But I think perfecting your behavior as a parent by the time the child is 3 is kind of late. I think ideally you would learn to regulate your emotions and control yourself around the child probably earlier than that, because while the child might not necessarily remember, they're already being shaped by what you're doing. I mean, children are like massive sponges, so they just absorb whatever you show them. I hear someone say, "Why do you speak only of mothers? How about fathers? Are they not also responsible for the education of their children?" Yes, both are responsible, and upon both will fall the penalty for having neglected their most sacred duty. The reason why I address mothers is because they, as a rule, have the responsibility to attend their children while fathers are at work. So back then, this is sort of what happened, and it still is to some degree, especially with our modern maternity leave, that the mother is most often the one staying with the baby or with the child, at least for the first part of its life. Children, as a rule, do not realize they are being naughty. You must realize that even a child of 5 who upsets and destroys your things has no real conception of what he is doing. To his imagination, things appear in a different light than to a grown-up. This is something that I think a lot of people nowadays tend to forget, is that a child's brain is not a grown-up brain, but more naughty. It's just not developed yet. It does not know anything. So when people are like, this stupid brat broke something, it does not have a concept of that item. It does not know that porcelain breaks. How can it do something on purpose when it does not even understand an action and a consequence? I will outline now a few things which parents must refrain from doing. We often hear of girls who run away from home and end badly, of boys who even in their teens become criminals. These boys and girls were once babies, and their mothers were proud of them. They tried to bring them up properly, they did what they thought was right for them, but they did not succeed. Why? One cause of utter failure in the home education is due to the manifestation of temper. Temper is poisonous to the harmony of the family. Its evils are many, and they are deadly as the sting of the viper. Some people are subject to temper only once in a while. That is plausible. No one could possibly be in a temper all the time. But even once in a while is enough to impress young children with its marks, that it will injure them for years to come. Not long ago, I heard an ignorant young woman, who I suppose must have become a mother against her will, address on the street her 4-year-old boy thus: "You damn fool, come here." Her voice was by no means sweet, but angry and shrill. She ran after him with the gait of a tigress. She shook him, and well, I did not even turn to see what else she did. I was so shocked and angered that I had to move on quickly. I recall a girl of 10 who, after her mother had whipped her, tearfully exclaimed, "Mother, when I am a big girl and you're an old woman, I am going to beat you as you did me today." The mother was scandalized. She said, "Stop, don't talk that way to your mother." But nevertheless, she had learned her lesson and has never spanked her child since then. This is unusual, I think, for 1924 to be against corporal punishment. I used to think that it was so normalized that in a guide like this, she would say something like, you shouldn't do it too often, but every now and then. But then she's like, no, this means you have no control over yourself and you're gonna scar the child for life. Temper generates temper, which is the worst curse of the human race. The children that you want to be obedient and repressed through beating and scolding will probably keep quiet while they are children. But when they become older, they will show their temper to you. And so you will be happy when they are married and gone away from your own home, to start another home with the same endowment as yours. Children punished, scolded, beaten, and dealt with temper. Make a promise to yourself when you have a child that, notwithstanding provocation, you will banish angry tones and threats, abhor beating, use patience and persuasion, because a child cannot see things through your eyes. When we are adults, we tend to follow the paths of our younger days. If we worked then, we will always look for work and delight in it. If we have played and played, we want a life of idleness. Women who have had a childhood of play are preparing themselves for future disappointment. As someone who played as a child for a long time, I think my childhood was really long. I had younger siblings, but then I enjoyed playing with them. So it was only an excuse like, oh no, I'm still playing with dolls at 14 because my sisters are younger than me. But then we all know what actually happened. I actually loved that stuff. So, I mean, according to this, I would not really enjoy working, which I think I do. Maybe it's just because I'm working in a field that I love and it's something that I like doing. But even then, I am a bit lazy, of course I am, but I wouldn't say I have this disgust towards labor. But then her solution to that, to avoid the child being too used to the idea of playing instead of working, her solution is, do not tell me it is impossible for you to put your daughter to work, for I know very well if you start her with small duties when she is a tiny bit of a thing, you will succeed. But if you neglect your responsibility when she is small, by letting her play with children all the time, your duty will grow harder as she grows older, for it is almost impossible to take a girl who has formed the habit of playing all the time and place her suddenly to work with success. Why is she only talking about daughters? That's a bit sus. She's not mentioning boys at all here. She does not mention that boys that like to play around then have trouble doing housework or, doing well in their field. She's only talking about daughters becoming idle. But then she talks about the overindulged child. The overindulged child is another sacrifice to the altar of mother's ignorance. A child who has had everything in his infancy, including his own way, will quite often turn out to be a helpless, lonesome, miserable man. No one pities him, we call him selfish, and we leave him alone. We seldom realize that the man has reached such a wretched condition because of an overfond mother. Of course, it's a mom's fault when a guy is awful. No one can tell you exactly of the struggles and sufferings that are placed upon the shoulders of both men and women who were overindulged when young. Do you ever hear weak and wailing young women complaining of their lot, of their housework, of their ill health, of their children, of their husbands, in fact of everything? They cannot find any happiness in their lives. Why? Because they were overindulged as children, because they were not taught self-reliance. In fact, their idea of life was given to them wrongly. Life, which is work and health, struggle, persistence, patience, cheerfulness, was given to them under the idea that it would be a field of roses. Instead, they have found it to be a place of thorns. This is an interesting point because I think about this a lot. I think about how our ancestors that had to live through poverty, they had to live through hunger, through wars, through conflicts, through death, through illness, they seemed to be much more content with their lives than we are. And it's obviously subjective. I mean, if you look at some statistics, they might tell you I'm wrong, but this is just the way I see it. The less people had, the more content they used to be because they truly appreciated what was coming their way. But us, we are given everything at such a young age that then when things go wrong, when things go unexpectedly, it's just very, very difficult for us to cope with that and to understand what's going on because it's a new feeling to be going through hardship when your parents did everything in their power to make life, the best and happiest for you, which is obviously something they should do as your parents, but also maybe it's not really setting your children up for success when it comes to difficult situations. I genuinely don't know what the right solution is. Like, obviously, you shouldn't torture your kids just in case they get tortured in the future. But sometimes I feel like we just have a way too good. And then that's why in real life situations, it's just so difficult to deal with that. Parents, however rich and powerful, cannot ensure a happy and successful life for their children. It is my opinion that there should be a law that would decree millionaires not to leave each of their children more than $20,000. In fact, no man should earn more than $20,000 a year. I mean, that's 1920s we're talking about. That was a lot of money, but it wasn't millions in modern dollars. If there was not the greed of money, this would be a better world. If each of us would do some work, no one would be overworked. If there were not millionaires, some of whom believe themselves almost equal to God, there would not be the curse of money attached to their children, who in the end pay for their father's avarice. So what she's saying is children of rich parents have it really difficult because they're given everything from the start and they don't really have motivation to do anything, which I agree with. I think millionaires and celebrities' children are most of the time not doing fantastically, not doing very well. They seem very lost. They seem like they don't really know which direction to take with their lives. So I think I would agree with that, actually. And then her very modern leftist even view of if each of us would do some work, no one would be overworked. But then if there were not millionaires, some of whom believe themselves almost equal to God, she seems to have it really against rich people. So the 1920s, eat the rich. Moderation. Moderation too must be considered. Moderation in food, in clothes, and other things. A child should not be permitted to have too many clothes. He should be taught to keep clean and to wear his clothes as they need be. Let him know that there are children who have no clothes at home. This sounds like when you don't want to eat as a child, or at least it used to be that way. And the grown-ups would be like, yeah, and children in Africa don't have any food at all. Which specific area of Africa are you talking about? Because it's a whole continent. And B, I was always like, what am I supposed to mail my dinner to someone in Africa? Like, what are you talking about? This will temper his impulses to change extravagantly his own apparel. Another important phase of a child's moderation is food. And if anyone succeeds in controlling his child from overeating, he has taught him a great deal. Because it has been said that a man who knows where to stop eating will be able to control his other appetites. Suggestion for training older children. What shall those mothers do whose boys and girls are already in their teens and who cannot take advantage of the elementary teachings given in this book? First, be happy. Dismiss from your mind cares and worries. Try to think of happy events. Teach your children to keep a happy demeanor, exhort them to happy thoughts, to happy and good deeds. Impress them with the fact that the source of happiness is to be found within ourselves and not without. If you let them believe that money, clothes, amusement, or friends shall make them happy, they will always be dependent on these external circumstances. By teaching instead that happiness is a source within ourselves, consisting in the peace of mind and contentment of soul, they may have or they may lose their earthly possessions, but they will always be rich in that which nobody can take away from them, the perpetual spring of happiness. Second, do not think or talk of ailments. Remember that ailments are the outcome of temper, of hate or overeating, of immoderation. If you ever become sick, take good care of yourself. After you are healed, see into which of these faults you had fallen, and be very careful that your children shall profit by your experience. Third, banish from life anger, jealousy, envy. The outcome of these three vices keeps humanity in perpetual misery. Wait, so is she saying that if you get sick, it's because you are misbehaving? Ailments are the outcome of temper. I don't think I get so angry that I get sick. I don't think that's how it works. I think it's like a virus, but go off. Lastly, give your children every loving care, but do not be over-solicitous in extending diffusively your service. Remember, the more attention you give them, the least appreciation you will receive. Oof! What in the boomer language is this? The more attention you give them, the least they're gonna visit you when you're old. So don't waste your time. That's a hot take, but at the same time, I can see some parents being too involved in their children's lives to the point that they basically scare them away. So then when they're grown-ups, they're just like, I cannot deal with this anymore. Many children are taught to be courteous only to people whom they like. This is a bad tendency and should be supplanted by teaching them to love and respect those with whom they come in contact every day. The most excellent endowment you can leave your children is to teach them love thy neighbor as thyself. I think this last bit is a good conclusion because as much as I believe in teaching your children to be happy, independent adults, I think we're also losing the scope of other people that they have to deal with. And I just find some younger people nowadays very inconsiderate. So if we could keep them independent and keep them happy, but also at the same time, teach them that they don't exist in a vacuum and that there is other people and other children that they have to think of, that will be, I think, swell. Maybe it's this phase that we're going through because obviously as a society, our views change, our approaches change, and it takes time to get it right. I truly believe that we're on the right path, but we just need to take a detour to empathy and just make sure that we think of others. That's my takeaway from this. I think a lot of the tips here were actually pretty nice. I think some of them are rubbish, obviously, but surprisingly, there aren't that many shocking or shockingly bad tips and advice here, which, given that it's 1924, is quite surprising because I think even our parents or our grandparents were raised completely different to us. And still, when you read books like this, it makes you think that maybe we're actually always the same. Maybe it's not that deep. Maybe kids will be just fine because they've always been fine. I'm actually not sure. If you actually have kids, if you are a parent, let me know in the comments because I'm really interested to hear your perspective on that. If you come in contact with children as a teacher or as a kindergarten teacher, what are your thoughts on how kids behave compared to what you used to see maybe someday before, or compared to your memories of that? I'm actually really interested in how it's going because there's a lot of fear mongering, there is a lot of criticism, but then some human behaviors just never change. So I'm curious to see if it actually is getting worse or changing in any way, or if it's just always been the same. But obviously with new technologies, with new challenges that we face as a society, it's always going to be a bit different. So let me know what you think, and don't forget to check out patreon.com/textory for some additional materials regarding old stuff and cool mysteries and diaries and stuff. So just go there, and I'll hear you in another episode. Bye.